An inside look at the South African runner charged with murder after a woman was fatally shot in his home. I'm Marcus Mabry for the New York Times. Magazine correspondent Michael Sokoloff spent time with Oscar Pistorius, the first double amputee sprinter to compete in the Olympics, for a New York Times Magazine profile published last year. Michael, thanks for being here.
Glad to be with you.
The whole world's been contacting you because of this profile you did of Pistorius. You've heard from South African media, British media, all around the world, asking you, I suppose, are you surprised by this? But of course, you spent a few days with him, 4 days with him, about a little over a year ago.
Yes.
What was that like? What was he like?
First, yes, I'm shocked, and we can talk more about that. But he was a prince of a subject to be around. I mean, this is someone who I went over there, he felt he was my host. Picked me up at the hotel. He would cook us lunch between his workouts. I mean, he's a very charismatic, magnetic personality.
And to put it in context, this is an athlete who already was a really big deal in South Africa, $1 million endorsements.
A huge deal around the world and an even bigger deal in South Africa. A celebrity of highest magnitude in South Africa, but didn't carry himself that way. And I've interviewed a lot of athletes, a lot of politicians, here in the U.S., and this was a very different guy. And really a very pleasant guy to be around, in addition to, his accomplishments and what he does. And there was and is much to be admired there.
And in your piece, of course, you really talk about kind of the man and the athlete and the controversy around whether or not the blades that he ran on as a amputee actually gave him some advantage, actually, in racing. But you do talk a lot about the person, too. And I think maybe a lot of the media accounts have glommed onto the fact that you talk about some risky behavior, some reckless behavior, that you actually, really striking to me from your piece was when you talk about how, you guys were going at 155 miles per hour in his car, and the roads were wet. So tell us about that behavior.
Oscar is an adrenaline freak. He has cars, not the kind of car you buy at a dealership. These are race cars. These are cars that belong on a track. And we would be driving, and he'd be going some insane speed, and I would look at the kilometers meter, and then I went back that first night, and I went on Google and did the little conversion. I said, wow, we're going something like 150 miles an hour. It was terrifying, and a sign of his recklessness, impulsivity. It caused me a lot of worry, and when I left there, I thought, this is a man who's going to hurt himself.
And he had hurt himself.
He had hurt himself. He had a speedboat incident. He was driving his own speedboat. He's a young guy with expensive toys. And he was badly, badly injured in that speedboat accident. And then he drove like he drove. He had finally given up his dirt bikes. So there are people who are made that way. Mm-hmm. And he's made that way. It occurred to me he's going to hurt himself. I did not see him as someone who was going to hurt someone else.
A few other things from the piece that really, in hindsight now, after what's happened in South Africa, seem kind of spooky, frankly. There's a piece where, part of the piece where you're talking about he takes you to shoot guns. The woman who was killed at his home was shot. He also talks about how there had been an intruder, at least his alarm had gone off the night before one of your times together.
I was with him.
Scary.
Well, first of all, it's the kind of thing you write, and it looks one way, and then a year later you look and say, wow, that feels a lot different now. But the incident was, we were together, and he said, hey, last night, in the middle of the night, I heard something, and I came downstairs with my gun because I thought there was an intruder in the house. And I began to ask him about his gun, and he said, hey, do you want to go to the shooting range? And we went to the shooting range, and we practiced firing his 9mm semi-automatic handgun, which at the time, I was with a young guy, and this is something he liked to do, and I'm a journalist. I'm going to follow him wherever he wants to go. Now I think, well, I don't know what happened in that house last night, and we can't do great police reporting on South Africa from here.
That's right.
But I do know that he was a person who was concerned and maybe fearful. People have varying degrees or of courage, and they're courageous about different things. So I would say that Oscar seemed to me to be a courageous person. But in his own home, like many South Africans of some means, he was very fearful. Mm-hmm.
A real crime issue in South Africa is of long standing.
Yes. I mean, it's if you have money in South Africa, there's no longer apartheid, but there's a terrible income gulf. And there are haves and have-nots, and the people who have live in compounds with barbed wire and guns. And that's how Oscar lived, and it wasn't terribly unusual for South Africa.
Right. Michael, an important story we'll keep watching, and we know you will too. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
That's all for now. I'm Marcus Mabry for the New York Times.